Record. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Adoption Happy Hour brought to you by NAAP. We are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, where it is our mission to unify the adoption community and elevate our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connections. I'm Marcy Keithley, your host for the evening, along with Jennifer Falsing and Beth Story in the Zoom room helping out this evening. We want to welcome all of you this happy Friday night. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And please feel free to use the chat room, say hello, how you identify in the constellation, and where you're from. Before we get started with this evening's guest, we have a few announcements. Again, we want to remind everyone this is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. Portions of this event are recorded and may be shared in our private happy hour group on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. Please remain on mute, raise your hand on screen or the virtual hand to be recognized, and you're welcome to post your questions or comments in chat. If you are experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thought, please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988.
You want me to do mine?
Yeah, I thought that's
Oh. Sorry. Okay, so you're all here about happy hour tonight, so you know about that. That is on the first and third Friday of the month. We are finishing our fourth season, getting ready to start season 5. Then we have First Families, Birth Parents Journeying Together. We had a phenomenal meeting last night with Gretchen Sasson. We discussed her book, Relinquished. We also have Putting Yourself Together After Reunion with Dr. Joyce McGuire-Pabo. That's approximately the third Tuesday. She is skipping April because she's going to be in Denver at the summit with us. And then our final program is Self-Love Essentials for the Adoption Constellation. That is on the last Thursday of the month, and it is with Danielle Gaudet. And while I'm talking about our programs, I'm gonna let you know, like I said, one great idea that Marcy had, Paige was in on naming it along with Lynn Grubb and some other people. Happy Hour was our COVID project. So one great idea led to a fourth season. We had 26 episodes and we had 1,584 unique attendees. Season 5 starts April 5th. You definitely want to join us. Marcy is going to be featured with the big reveal. The story continues. So when you think you know Marcy's story, oh, buckle in. You don't know Marcy's story. Make sure you register.
That is right. We are looking forward to a great time the next time we're together, but now we're going to spend a minute on the summit. We are gearing up big time. Let me get this big. There we go. We are gearing up big time for the summit, April 25th through the 28th in Denver. We are partnering with Right to Know to bring the NPE, adoption, and assisted reproduction communities together for an outstanding event. Okay. What happened to my... Didn't want to advance. Here we go. This is what you get for a ticket. There will be entertainment. There will be 50+ speakers, all sorts of different workshops, panels, keynote addresses, small support groups, and entertainment like you will not find anywhere else. So we are really, really looking forward to that. Plus, we're going to feed you a lot. Taco bar Thursday night, 3 hot breakfasts, 2 lunches, and snacks, all in your registration fee. We need you to reserve a room very soon because there are not a whole lot of rooms left, and the block will close at the end of this month. So the discount price that we've negotiated will no longer be available. I will be dropping lots of links in the chat in just a bit, so you will be able to see where to go to do that. We have really cool t-shirts this year. We had cool t-shirts last year. We have those in addition to new ones. And there will be a link where you can see that you can click on, you can order your shirt, you can have it delivered to you at home, and then you can wear it while you are there at the summit. So we wore these in Salt Lake City, and we had a lot of fun with them because it drew attention as we walked around, and as we were in our booth, people were like, that's a cool shirt. So you will want to get one. I'm afraid I may have missed someone, but these are all familiar faces to you guys. These people from our NAAP family will be presenters or panelists or moderators at the summit. So isn't it cool that we have all of these people playing a huge role at this event that's coming up? So get your tickets, get them soon, get your room reserved because we don't want you to miss out on the summit.
Is that it for you, Jen?
Yep.
Jen, you good?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay, well, great. Nancy, you want to go ahead and take yourself off of mute? We want to welcome Nancy to this evening as our guest speaker to Happy Hour. So welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, Marcy.
This has been, welcoming. So glad to have you here.
Thank you.
I'd like to share, before we get into our conversation, just share a little bit about you with our attendees this evening. Nancy is a wife, mother, sister, friend, newly retired midlife transition coach, and late discover adoptee. After a successful 30-year sales and marketing career in the corporate and nonprofit sectors, she started her own coaching business in 2003 for midlife professionals who are at a new threshold and asking themselves what's next. Whether triggered by a significant loss, setback, or inner stirring, we all come to a point when we're confronted by the deeper questions of life. Who am I and why am I here? Nancy's memoir, Reunion, it's in process of being finished, is based on her own midlife identity quake and journey that led her to answer her own essential questions. Nancy is still a Midwesterner at heart, lives with her husband of 22 years in Washington, and she has a son and daughter-in-law who also have made their home in nearby Bremerton. She enjoys inspirational beauty that the Pacific Northwest offers via hiking, kayaking, and camping with her husband, David. So welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, Marcy. So, first of all, I just want to thank Marcy and the whole team for inviting me to share my story tonight. It's still this afternoon. I'm in Seattle, Washington, Bainbridge Island to be exact. And I was very excited about doing this tonight because when I first found out I was adopted, I was very much alone. It was 1991, and there were no books about late discovery adoptees per se. And I just felt I didn't know anyone who was adopted. I didn't have any community, and I don't think any community like this was ever started at that point. But I found you a year after I found my birth father 5 years ago, and you helped me through COVID, and you helped me go deeper into my story and understand it. So it became clear that if I was going to write the memoir, I needed to do a deep dive. And it's, I believe that we can only heal when we've had, after a traumatic loss, when we understand it and make meaning of it. Soren Kierkegaard said, life needs to be understood backwards, can only be understood backwards, but needs to be lived forward. And I believe that's true for all of us with our stories. And I think that's why these groups are so powerful. But why the hero's journey to tell my story? I'm going to be using the hero's journey tonight because it's a universal story pattern from mythology in which the hero is the person that goes on the adventure and is victorious when they have a decisive crisis. They come home transformed, and very much that was the trajectory of my experience. When I started writing my memoir, I looked at different story structures, and none fitted as well as the hero's journey. So there's 17 stages. Let me share my screen here. There's actually 17 stages in the hero's journey, and you'll notice it's a circle because just get my picture back up here. Because the hero sets out on his journey and he returns transformed. So that's the whole cycle. And this is actually the cycle I've been using in midlife career transition coaching for 20 years. We have an ending, and then we set out on this adventure, but we don't into the unknown world, and we don't know what we're going to find. And then eventually we return being transformed by it and find our next chapter. So that's very much how it went for me. And what I find is, stop share there. What I find is that from listening to the stories I've heard from adoptees is that we're all in different places in our journey. You might be at the beginning, standing right on the threshold of a new adventure, or you might be in the messy middle where it's very challenging and you're just trying to hang on and continue, or you might be at the end, you've returned home with your gifts and you're sharing that on webinars or online chats like this. So, but wherever you are, my intention is giving you this kind of pattern so maybe you can locate yourself in your story and recognize that you are the hero of your story. Little background, because I found out when I was 37. So there was this whole life I had before that, 37 years. I won't take you through all of it, but I'd like to start with, I was born in 1953 on the south side of Chicago. Jennifer's also from the south side of Chicago, at Illinois Central Hospital. And that was the beginning of the baby scoop era. My parents were only children. They wanted a big family of 6 kids, but that wasn't to be. And they always told me that God gave them, the 2 of us, my brother, who was 5 years older than me, Ray, and myself there. So they felt blessed to have us. Before I turned 1, we moved from Rogers Park outside of Chicago to this suburb of Chicago called Park Ridge. And it's about 20 minutes from downtown next to O'Hare. And growing up here was my foundation. We lived in that house, this red brick Tudor, for 50 years till my mom died. And it was a place that I considered my safe haven. It was a place I always felt like I was myself when I came home. So we had a safe neighborhood. We had great neighbors. It was a safe town. It was stable, great schools, churches, all the things that one would want. And I had the opportunity, let's see if we can do this. You share. I'll just go back to this one. Oh, darn it. No. Okay, let's do this. Stop sharing. This is the part. Okay. So there's my family. When I was 9 days old, they brought me home from the hospital. And then here, oops. I was quite a happy child. I had all the opportunities in life. I took ballet lessons, skating lessons, piano lessons, art lessons. That was, everything that every child could want. But what people didn't see about me was I really had, I was really nervous, and I had a separation anxiety. As soon as my mother would go across the street to a bridge game, I'd be calling in 5 minutes, "Mom, when are you coming home?" And it got to be the neighborhood joke. But that's how I was. And I was very different from my brother. My brother Ray, just get back to this. My brother Ray was the what I considered the smart one in the family. I was the emotional one and the sensitive one, and he was the rational one. He teased me a lot. But we were very close. And that's what, you know, that was one of the reasons why I didn't realize I was adopted. I mean, I just had such a close family. But you'll see from the picture of my brother and me that we don't look very much alike. And I always knew that, but he looked just like my dad. So I thought I looked just like my mom, and that must have been the reason. So I didn't go any further than that, but everybody asked, didn't you know? That was really the only reason, because our temperaments were so different. So life did get better. My last 2 years, oh, sorry, one major thing I forgot to tell you. Our family was quite tight and very happy until one day our father died of a heart attack at work, and he never came home again. And that was what I thought was my first traumatic loss, not knowing about the primal wound at the time. But it really hit me hard, and I got a very strong message, and that was that I can't be sad. I can't show my sadness. My mom said, we can't be sad. People don't like to be around sad people, and we need all the friends that we have. And so from that point on, guess what? I became a people pleaser. I smiled when I was sad, or I'd go away, or, you know, I really became the good adoptee because I didn't want to lose anyone else from my life. But life did get better. My last 2 years of high school were my best. I was confident, I was popular, I got good grades and had close friends. I was liked for who I was, which was really refreshing. So now we'll go into the, we'll go into the hero's journey. The hero's journey began for me in 1991. And of course, at this time it was pre-internet, and it was pre-email, and it was pre-DNA testing. For me, the hero's journey begins with being in their own setting, which is called the known world. And then they receive a call to leave it behind and go on an adventure. The hero's really reluctant, though, to answer that call. And for me, my known world was, I was 37, living in San Francisco in 1991 with my ex-husband, or with my ex-husband now, my second husband. And what else was I going to say about that? And my son, Chris, who is 12 years old. And my life wasn't at all what I thought it would turn out to be. Very shortly after being married, I knew it wasn't going to work. But I did everything I could to keep it together, because I didn't want to unravel and again, have a second divorce, be twice divorced before I'm 40. So that was a really difficult time, but I stayed in it. And then I got an invitation, a literal invitation to my 20th high school reunion. I didn't believe that they could find me. I hadn't gone to the 10th, so, and I had 2 different last names and 6 different addresses, so I wasn't expecting it. I wanted to go, and I needed the break, and I thought this might be good for me to kind of return to what I know, and also to kind of regain a sense of myself and see friends in the process that I had lost touch with. But it was expensive, and it was only for 3 days, and I knew my husband wasn't going to be happy to take care of my son. But then Liz called, and let me share. You want to meet Liz for sure. Yeah. So Liz called. There we go. All right. Liz was my best friend growing up. We shared the same birthdays, and we went to each other's birthday parties. We were inseparable. We were different, And we'd fight a lot because I was the good adoptee following the rules, and she was very curious and would get into trouble and grounded most of the time. So she calls me out of the clear blue after I get this invitation. She said, you know, we used to call each other by our last names. Barry, how the hell have you been? Are you going to go to the reunion? I'll go if you go. I mean, she was just spitting it all out. And I wasn't sure. And I was hesitant. She said, come on, let's go. And I need a place to stay because my parents, you know, her parents had moved from Park Ridge. So she asked me if she could stay with my mom and me. And then we did. We met in Park Ridge. It was July 26th of 1991. And we got together and got all dressed up and went to the first night reunion. And let's see, here we go. This might give you a sense of what we looked like in our older years. So we went to the party and it was going well. And then all of a sudden she pulled me into the corner of a dark bar that was kind of cordoned off. And she said, Nancy, I've been wanting to ask you something. And I said, sure, what? And she said, well, how did you feel when you found out? And I looked at her and went, what are you talking about? She said, well, when you found out you were adopted. And in that moment, my life changed. And I was in complete shock. I was in disbelief. I thought, you've got to be having me mixed up with somebody else. How would you know that? And I asked her those questions and she said, my mother told her mother when we were kids, but her mother had kept it a secret too, but thought by this point in time I would know. So we couldn't go back into the party, obviously. We sat out on the sidewalk and cried and held each other for 2 hours, trying to make sense of it all. And there was no way to make sense. But my first question was, what nationality am I? Because I was raised to believe I was Irish. And I had a lot of pride in that. I knew Ray and I didn't look alike, but I couldn't really fathom that everyone else might know but me. So it was, the next phase was really about the hero refusing the call. And that was me. I went back on the plane to San Francisco and I tried to stay away from my mom all weekend. I couldn't face her. And then on my flight back, I thought, well, I'm in the same physical body. My history is my history. It's real, but I am not the same person that I always knew myself to be. And obviously cried for weeks on end. And I think the part that hurt the most was I thought my family was the people that loved me most in my life. And it was unconditional love. But I feared if I told them that I might lose them and then I'd be alone in the world, which was, as I said, my greatest fear. So I got home and my husband at the time handed me a 5-page letter that said all the reasons why I should not tell my mom. And it was 5 pages handwritten, and it was extremely thorough. And I was still in shock, but I was reading this and going, are you kidding? I have to tell her. But, reading that, my worst fears were being confirmed. So that's when the threshold guardians come in to the hero's journey. And he was my threshold guardian. He was the voice of warning disguised as helpful advice. The state of Illinois also happened to be a threshold guardian. As you know, the state of Illinois had closed records until 2012. When I got home, I looked for my birth certificate and there it was, and it had my parents' name on it and everything. Looked at the bottom of it, it said Department of Vital Statistics. So I called them and I said, I have my birth certificate that's saying that my parents are my parents, but I'm adopted. I just found out I was adopted. And she said, oh, does it have the address of the hospital on it? And I said, no. And she said, that's your amended birth certificate. I said, well, where is my birth certificate? And she said, sealed in the records, and we can't give it to you. And that's when anger set in. That's when all of a sudden, people said, didn't you feel betrayed? And I didn't feel betrayed. I was really confused and sad, but now I was pissed. And I really thought, I don't need their protection. I'm 37 years old. I'm a mother myself, and I pay taxes. So why can't I know my real identity? But the upside of anger is motivation. But I didn't know anyone who was adopted. So the hero finally goes on the journey, crosses that threshold, starts the journey, and all of a sudden supernatural aid comes to them. And synchronicities occur and magical helpers appear. And that's what happened to me. The first experience was the day that I got back to work. I took my lunch break and went to Barnes and Noble bookstore. And I just had to find some book that was on adoption, and obviously couldn't. But there was a redheaded young man who was working there that helped me find this section. And when I was looking at it, he said, I'm adopted. This is just when I've been feeling like I know no one who's adopted. I have no one I can turn to. Because I'm adopted, but I've always known I was adopted. I'm going, oh, that doesn't help. So, but he said, my family told me from the beginning, they always told me I was special, I was chosen. I don't think I'd want to really look for my birth family, but maybe I want to know my medical history. And I'm still flipping through the books, and he goes, I think if I found out when I was in my 30s or 40s, I'd feel like the rug was pulled out from underneath me. And I thought, yep, you gave me words for the thing that I couldn't find the words for. I felt like I was absolutely a physical pain for weeks of feeling like somebody had sliced me open and I was gutted. It was the worst stomach pain I've ever had, but it was also kind of familiar. And I would find out later that it was because it was bringing up the grief of the loss of my father that I suppressed for so long. The next synchronicity happened to be a childhood friend of mine who had moved to Oakland to become a Lutheran minister. And my mom had told me about it, and I thought, I'm going to call him. It'll be safe. He knows my background, he knows my family, but he can't tell anybody because he's a minister. That was what I thought. We walked around Lake Merritt together. When I told him my story, he said, I think I've got something that'll help you. And I said, what? And he said, ALMA, the Adoption, Liberation Movement Association, I believe is what it stood for. The National Search Organization meets in the basement of my church once a month. I'm going, are you kidding me? So all these synchronicities happened in the very first week I was back. And, when the hero crosses the threshold into the unknown, it happens because they can't go back. They just can't. There's a wonderful quote from a French essayist, and it goes, and the day came when the risk to remain tied in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. And that was me. I needed to stop playing. I just realized I had to stop blaming God, because that's what I was doing. Why now? Why me? And instead consider the possibility that this was happening exactly as it was supposed to happen. And I just needed to surrender and give in and go with the ride. And so that's what I told myself, and just ask God to show me the way. And so I followed my inner voice instead of my husband and the state of Illinois. And I told my mom what I had found out. She came to visit me in San Francisco when I was for my 38th birthday. And I thought, well, that'll be the time to tell her. So I wrote her a letter, I handed it to her, and she only read a few sentences of it. And she said, what do you want to know? Took my hand, and I said, I want to know everything. I want to know why. And she said, well, you know, your dad and I wanted 6 children, and I was pregnant 4 times, and I lost 3 of the babies. And they were really horrific reasons for losing the babies. So the last one lived 2 weeks and had spina bifida and was blind. And while mom was in the hospital, her obstetrician said, you must not try again, because this is just going to be way too much for you. So he said, I'll find you a little girl to go with your little boy. And it just so happened my birth mother was in the hospital giving birth to me at that time. So after, when the baby died, this all took place. And so that was the, you know, what happened and how it happened. But she said that they planned to tell me when I was 10 years old. Mom was a teacher and she had seen adopted children. This is during the 50s with the era of, you know, the stigma and the era of secrecy. And she wanted to make sure I was old enough, and she was going to tell me with my dad. And then dad died. And she said, I couldn't give you that. When life was going well, I couldn't bring you down. When life was bad, I couldn't add to it. So, but she said, I know your mother's name. And that was not what I expected. And it was Donna Gidley. And I said, how do you know that? She said, I was at the hospital and I believe the nurse left open the file on the counter so I could see it. And I read it. It was upside down and I read it and I kept it in my lockbox. I wrote it down and kept it in the lockbox just in case you'd want that when I told you. But that never happened. So she said, if you want to look, I'll help you find her. So the second act of the hero's journey is the initiation. That's when life's about to change. And the hero starts out on the path and sees all of the complications and obstacles ahead. You know, just think of Dorothy on the yellow brick road. You know, that was me. So it's when you meet your tests and your allies. And mine was embarking on a search to find Donna with just her maiden name. So I went to my first Alma meeting and I was completely overwhelmed. I got a binder this thick of all the things to do and not to do, more not to do's than to do. It was the first time I ever met other adoptees and birth parents, and they were, you know, some were elated because they had found who they were looking for, and others, remember pre-internet, all of it's pre-DNA testing, and then others had tried for years and were still coming and had not found. So I was wondering, what am I in for? And the first step that they recommended was contact the hospital where you were born. I called directory assistants to try to find them, because now I'm in, this is happening when I'm in San Francisco, and the adoption occurred in Chicago. So I contacted called 411 directory assistants and asked them for Illinois Central Hospital's number. And they said that there was no listing. That's really strange. I know that it says that on my baby book, but so the next day I went to a new gynecologist for an annual checkup, and he was new on our plan. So I went to him and he had this accent that sounded like Chicago, and my blood pressure was high. He said, do you have a few stressors going on in your life? And I said, yeah, just a few, you know, and one of them is I'm adopted. Well, he pulled me back to his office and said, my kids are all adopted and my wife just found out she's adopted. Couldn't believe the synchronicity. And so I said, I'm trying to find Illinois Central Hospital. By any chance, would you know if it closed? And he said, well, I grew up blocks from Illinois Central Hospital, and my father was an OBGYN there. I said, I'll call, he's dead, but I'll call my mother and find out what happened to him. He calls her, and the next day she calls back and she says, Illinois Central Hospital is now Hyde Park Hospital. And when you think about the really crazy things that happened about it, half hour later, I called my mom to say, guess what I found out what the name of the hospital is now? And she said, yeah, I know. I just stepped out of the shower and was listening to a radio show, and it's really wild. But they said that there was a nurses' strike at Hyde Park Hospital, formerly known as Illinois Central Hospital. So she was hearing it when I was calling her to tell her I had found out. So I wrote to them pretending I was Donna. So my first step into this journey was lying myself. And I pretended to be her, said all my records were lost in the Oakland fire and I need them. They wrote back and said, guess what? You need your mother's, you need to give us the social security number and your birth date in order for us to release the records. And of course, I didn't have that. That's why I was pretending to be Donna. So that didn't work. And then I called the Cook County Circuit Court to request my adoption file. And they said, oh, you can't have that. That's your parents' file. It's not yours. I can't have that either. So the file needed to have a court order to be opened up. I didn't have good cause enough for that at the time. And I asked my mom if she would write to them and request it, and she said she would, but that took about 6 weeks. And so that wasn't helping me with my search. And at this point, the hero goes into the innermost cave. They want to turn back, but they've come way too far. But they recommit to the journey. And no matter what it takes, they're going to stick in there. So I had tried everything I could. I thought I'm going to take a break, wait for the next Alma meeting. And that's when it really hit me that I can't keep living this lie with my husband. And I needed to ask him for a divorce. He tried to talk me out of it, but I just was sure I needed the time to be alone in my life and heal, because I didn't take that time after my first divorce. And then right after doing that, Chris announced to me, my son, that he was moving to Seattle to live with his father in high school. Now, he was 12 years old, so that meant I had 2 years left with him, and I wasn't ready to be the empty nester. But I had made my bed now, and I was going to be alone, all alone. And it was my darkest moment. I thought, what have I done? So the hero seizes the sword, and that is AKA for gets the reward. The hero survived the ordeal and now completes the journey, and then discovers a part of himself that he never knew existed. And for me, that was the day after Christmas. I still hadn't found Donna. I stayed home from work, and feeling sorry for myself, I just turned on the TV. And Sally Jesse Raphael, she was a talk show host in 1991. She wore big red glasses. And she was reuniting a young girl with her father because she needed a bone marrow transplant. And the little girl didn't know who her father was, and they found him for her. And I just started to bawl. I want somebody to find my parents. So my husband said at the moment, maybe this is a good omen. And I thought, I don't know how this can be a good omen. I've tried everything. And then it dawned on me there was one thing I hadn't done. And it was a list of Gidleys in Chicago. But I had called all the Gidleys from the South Side directory. But my mom had sent me a list of Gidleys from the North Side directory. And I thought, that's the only thing I haven't done. And I called the first name on the list, Dennis Gidley. And he asked, he says, who are you? And I said, well, you wouldn't know me, but I'm looking for a Donna Gidley. And I wonder if you know her. And he said, yes, but why are you calling? And I said, oh, and then I was caught off guard completely. And I said, well, my mother's birthday is coming up, and it's a surprise. And I was given a list of names to call, and I was told to locate Donna, but I don't know anything about her. Because, oh, okay. So how would you know her? I said, well, I think, how would your mom know her? And I said, I think they, lived in the same neighborhood, and maybe my mom babysat for her or something like that. I just was making this up in the moment. I'm the worst liar ever. So he gave me her name, Donna Hoffman, married to Sheffield Hoffman in Glencoe, Illinois. And I knew at that moment that that was a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. And the name was pretty Jewish. And I thought, I'm Jewish, because that was completely not how I was raised. I was raised a Christian. And I thought, oh my gosh, okay. Surprise, surprise. And so that's what I thought. And it was fine, but it was just a big shift for me. So he gives me the name and phone number. And I called Alma and they said, don't call her tonight. It might be too upsetting for her. So I waited for the morning, the longest night of my life. And I called. And the first person that answered the phone was her husband. I thought, oh God. I said, can I talk with Donna? And he said, she's not here, she's shopping. I said, do you know when she might be back? Oh yeah, about 3 o'clock. And I said, okay, I'll call back then. I just hung up. I was too afraid to stay on. He was going to ask too many questions. And then I called again, and it was my mother. It was Donna, and she answered. And Alma had taught me a trick. They said, when you call, tell her you're having problems with your phone, get her to write down the phone number, your phone number, and so she can call you back if you get disconnected. So I did. And then I said, and Donna, I want to tell you why I'm calling, but I want to make sure I'm talking to the right Donna. And I was surrounded by pictures of my family. It was the only way I could get through this call. And I said, did you live on the south side of Chicago? Yes. Are you about 57 years old or 58 years old now? Because I fear she was about 20 years older than me. She said, yes. And I said, does September 28th, 1953 mean anything to you? And there was a pause. And then she said, I didn't enter that contest. And I said, Donna, you're not alone, are you? You're not alone in the room. And she said, no. I said, Donna, I'm your daughter. And I just started blurting it out. I said, I get emotional just thinking this again. Donna, I'm your daughter. I just found out I was adopted. I've had a good life. I just wanted you to know that I'm alive. I'm in San Francisco and you have a grandson, and I'll never show up on your doorstep unannounced or unless invited. Will you please call me back? And she said, yes, I will. So she was sending me a signal, and 2 hours later, she called me back. And she sent her husband for Chinese takeout to the Chinese restaurant that was furthest from their house in a snowstorm so that she could call me. And she called me back, and we had 15 minutes, and I learned so much about it. I actually wrote down the notes here so I wouldn't forget it. She said she didn't remember the date of my birth until I said the date. She had blocked it out of her memory. And I have 4 half siblings, 2 sisters and 2 brothers. She said, do you have a bump on your nose? And I said, strange question. And of course we didn't have Zoom, so she can't see me. And I said, yeah, I've always had this bump that I never wanted to take a picture sideways because of. She said, oh, that's the French nose. All my kids have it. So that was pretty incredible. She said she was a secretary at CBS Studios and modeled at night. And she said, I never told anybody that I was pregnant. Only my mother knew. And I said, who's my father? And she says, I don't remember it. I blocked it all out. But there's one thing you need to know. I don't have a good health history. Everything had been so amazing. And then, everything collapses. And she told me that she had multiple sclerosis and she had diabetes and a heart condition. And she said, and I started drinking because I would try to calm the tremors that I had from the MS. So I've had a problem with alcohol. And I thought, these are my genes now. I thought I had the genes of my father who died of a heart attack at 45, but now I've got even worse genes. But she said, I'll call you again. Don't call me, I'll call you. And that's what we did. We did that for about a month. And then she finally told her husband, and she told her youngest daughter, who the first time I met her, I felt like I'd known her my whole life. So let's fast forward. We had our reunion at 819 Vine, the house I grew up in, which I would never recommend to anyone else. It was just a little too close for comfort, and I think kind of broke her heart to see what she missed out on. But we had a relationship for 12 years. And I saw her whenever I could get back to Chicago, and we sent cards and exchanged gifts. So the third act of the hero's journey is when you return home and the heroes triumphed over their greatest challenge and won the prize. Well, for me, that was Donna, finding Donna. But I knew I needed to do what I needed to do, and I needed to, start the divorce proceedings. We did. That got finalized. I moved out of the house. We sold it. And my son left for Seattle, as he said he would. And now I was a premature empty nester. But I found a job in Oregon, so I moved up closer to him. And that was a very good start. It was the very first time I had bought a house by myself. And I lived there for the next 5 years. Absolutely not dating anyone. I just wanted to be by myself. And that's when I really did my work. And 5 years later, an amazing thing happened. I decided I wanted to make a career transition, and I went to see a channeler, and I wanted her to find out, or give me some advice on what I was meant to do. And so she gave me a reading, and she said, you're going through what you're going through because you're meant to be a healer. You're meant to facilitate people in their healing. And she said, you can choose pharma. I was between pharma or starting an organization, much like Adoption Mosaic, of being a resource for adoptees, but I didn't really have the backing that I needed to be able to do that. So she said, you can choose pharma, but if you do, you'll eventually do this work of helping people heal. And then I said, I've been thinking a lot about my father, my birth father. And she said, well, that's because he's thinking of you too. She said, you're actually going to find out who he is when you write your memoir. I said, really? Okay. And I'd been thinking about writing the memoir, but I really couldn't. I didn't have the time to do it. But she said, you'll know it's an Oprah thing, is what she said to me. And then she said, and you're going to learn about a government change, system change that's happening. And somehow you're going to get involved with it, and it's affecting families and bringing them together. And I swear to God, I'm not lying. I have the notes and the recording from February 2nd, the week of February 2nd. I was interviewing for a job. The person knew about Measure 58 in Oregon, about opening up the records. And it was a measure at that point we were trying to get on the ballot. And so he told me about it, and I contacted Helen Hill, who headed up that effort. Oregon was the first state to open up their records. And I joined her efforts, collecting signatures and speaking in the town square and doing the PR for it. The next day, I get a call from Donna. She's remembered about who my birth father was. She said his name was Ricky. Now, Ricky in Chicago, that's kind of a stretch. She said his name was Ricky. He had black curly hair, dark eyes, and a killer smile. And I thought, oh my gosh. Okay. And I was just feeling so overwhelmed by all of it. And she said, and I remember where I met him. I met him on the Illinois Central Railroad train that took me to work in the morning. And it was at 71st and Jeffrey. I said, really? Okay. And then she went out with him because her boyfriend had broken up with her because she wouldn't have sex with him. And so when she met my father, she decided, well, that's not going to happen again. So she had sex with him. And of course, I was conceived. But she never told him about me. And he enlisted in the military. That's all she remembered. And she remembered because a year or two later, she saw him one more time. And she was getting out of a cab, and he was opening the cab door, and he was in his uniform. And they didn't talk because she was with her fiance that was going to become her husband. And he could see what the situation was. So they didn't say anything. Their eyes just locked. And then she thought, your father's father, or your father was part Armenian and part Irish. And I was so thrilled to hear that. She said his mother would cry when she heard the song Danny Boy, and he loved her more than anything in the world. So, but that's not enough to go on. I don't have a last name, and Ricky in Chicago isn't enough. So I just went on with life. I met my husband. I went into pharma. We got married, and I got the phone call from the hospital that my mother was in ICU, and my sister called me. My birth mother was in another hospital in Chicago. Within a year, they were both dead. And now I knew the secrets kind of went to the grave. And we sold 819 Vine, and it was demolished for an infill. So it was really, it's when I turned 50 and I felt like I was orphaned again. It was a really incredibly difficult loss. But the hero goes through one more test, one last time. And so kind of conscious of time, I'll just tell you what happened really quickly. As I started to write my memoir, I found those notes from the channeler. And I thought, I'm really interested in seeing, now that we have the internet and now that we have email and we have DNA testing, can I find out who Ricky is? And I didn't expect him to be alive, but I just wanted to know. So it's a long story, but I'll cut it short. I took the ancestry.com test. About 6 weeks later, my husband goes to bed and I wake him up. I got the email, my DNA test results are in. So opened up the report, and I had a half sister, and I open up her ancestry tree, and there's my father. And unfortunately, we couldn't scan this photo. I really wanted it tonight. I opened up the ancestry tree, and there was my father smiling at me with a boutonniere. He was the best man of his best friend's wedding, and he had crinkled eyes like I do, and he had this huge smile on his face, and he was handsome, and he looked just like my son. And I was just so amazed. So, and there were all the details. He was a Marine Corps, a Marine. He went into the Marine Corps April 1st of 1953, so the timing was perfect. His mother and father were from Croatia. They weren't Armenian or Irish. And they came over to Chicago, immigrated. And so I was half Croatian. Never knew that. Unfortunately, the birth dates were 1935 to 1980. He was gone, but he was 45 when he died. And that's how old my father was. And that's how old my birth mother's father was when he died. And then I saw the Railroad Pension Index. He worked for the railroad. It was just so exciting. So I tracked down my half sister in Portland, sent her a card. She opened it on what became National Siblings Day. I didn't know that until the day after. She calls me and she said, "Oh my God, I never knew you existed." And 5 days later, she digs through our father's cedar chest and finds a bunch of photos of him when he was a younger man and he got out of the service. And she sent this one photo to me and she said, "I do believe," so I do want to share this one photo with you. She said, "I do believe this is Donna." She had signed it in the right-hand corner. It was a model shot, and it was a shaky handwriting because she had MS. I knew that picture that she gave him, how many years ago at that point, 65 years ago, had stayed in his cedar chest all that time. So it was pretty amazing. So in conclusion, my reunion was my unexpected call to adventure. It was my midlife identity quake, but it's what led me to the truth and the wholeness and the full understanding of who I was. And it was so pivotal to me that I actually call it before reunion and after reunion when I tell the story of my life. My best friend Liz called and she said, so you spent the first half of your life not knowing who you were, and you spent the second half of your life finding out. That's about it. But more than finding out who I was, I learned so much about myself, that I was more courageous and resilient than I ever thought I was. And I sought out my truth and I found it, and I found my purpose in the process. And even though my threshold guardians were wanting to block me at every turn, I listened to my own inner voice. And I trusted that I would be led where I was supposed to be led. I was exactly where I needed to be. And when I asked God for help, the universe responded. If I hadn't followed my heart, I don't know where my life would be right now. It certainly wouldn't be the one I'm living. But even if the journey is hard, the gift of transformation that it offers is worth it. And that's the story. So.
Oh, thank you so much, Nancy. That was an amazing story, and you told it so well.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I realize how nervous I was because it's the first time I've told my whole story. I told a lot of it on Jennifer's Adoption Land
podcast, on Jen's podcast.
Podcast, but first time I've ever done it to a live audience. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. And do we have a minute for something? We
do. You have something else you'd like to share before what we're going to do is very quickly want to stop the recording and open it up to questions from the attendees. Sure. But if you'd like something to share before we stop the recording, yes.
You know what? That's okay. I thought I had it here, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay.